Hey, welcome back, Friday Live. We're just sitting here chatting and talking.
We can't help it.
Yep. Hey, Tanya, good to see you today. Thanks for joining us. If you're out there watching today, as always, please make a comment. Don't I mean we love want your likes. Do a love or do an emoji. We like those. Those are cool. We're old enough. We appreciate emojis. They're still kind of novel. But make a comment. Let us know you're out there. We'll at least try to give you a shout out. But it does help us on the deal. So what we're gonna do today? Let me turn my volume down because I'm trying to monitor.
We need
Uh,
to do the introduction.
oh yeah, we got to do an intro. Nah, let's not do the introduction today.
Okay,
Let's
cool.
just
Let's do
jump
it.
right
Yeah,
in.
yeah, yeah.
We have,
It's gonna throw Sean off, but he'll be okay.
he'll be all right. Today's gonna be a little bit more of a relaxed discussion because if you don't know what's coming up on May the 14th, Tim and I are going to be leading a men's. They're calling it a men's retreat, but we're not really going anywhere. So
Yeah.
I mean, it's not really a men's retreat. I guess it's more of a conference. But here at the Bridge Fellowship Church, May the 14th, starting at 9 o'clock, and it's entitled Kingdom Vision, and kind of the subtitle is seeing the world through His eyes. We're going to talk a little bit about what that means today. Next week, probably will, and even the next couple of weeks, we'll probably just dig into some of the stuff. We're going to show some of the passages that we're going to be talking about. If you're watching and you're going to be going to that or coming to that on May the 14th, 9 o'clock, the Bridge Fellowship, that was a plug. Read through these passages and give us a link or tell us you're coming. Send us a private message, or we want to get your email address because we're putting together an email that's going to go out probably sometime this weekend to everybody that's registered. And only reason we want you to register so we know how many hamburgers to make, and it's not like it costs you anything. But today we are going to talk about a little bit about kind of some of the premise behind.
Kingdom vision.
Yeah, what does kingdom vision look like? And Tim and I have been talking about what this is and what this isn't. And I think a lot of times it's interesting to find out what something is by talking about what it's not. Um, I don't know. I mean, you've been to a million like pastors conferences and stuff. I'm sure. Maybe you haven't. I don't know. You're kind of a
Well,
clod.
I've I have been. I've been to a lot of stuff. Close to Criswell. I've been to Billy Graham conferences up in Wheaton.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Wheaton, huh?
yeah. I'm a somebody now. Uh,
Nope.
I've been to a lot of different. I've sought. Well, it's not that I've been. I've sought a lot of uh, people's input about their ministry, not how they do their ministry, but I'm more interested in their personal walk.
Yeah, what they're thinking.
What, yeah, I want to know what they think, how they got to where they were, not in a critical sort of way, but just I'm fascinated by watching what they do that's successful, and that's actually a defined term. That's
Well,
not.
and watching how people deal with their failures is important.
Well, yeah, the
Failures.
whole thing. Even goofballs like
Easy.
well, no, they're
Alleged
like,
goofballs.
no, they're probably goofballs. I keep wanting to say Tammy Faye Baker. What was her
Jim.
husband's name? Jim Baker. Yeah. Uh, that guy. He went to jail. Their ministry fell apart. The televangelist who has it went south. But I don't remember how I got on his. But I read his book that he wrote when he was in prison. Don't even remember how or why I wanted to read it. But I was astounded. That guy really has a lot of insight to how God works. Not like he's analytical and he's looked at God and analyzed how he did it, but how he worked in his own life. And reading that book, he's redeemed, even though he's still suffering from a whole lot of stuff that transpired that he did purposely. I'm not holding him up as a big reference. I'm just saying, as you look at different people and watch their walks, whether they're utter failures or what you might consider great successes,
Well,
and we're surrounded by them.
well, you and I were talking just the other day about David in the scriptures. I mean, we could give you a million different examples.
Yeah.
I mean, David's a man after God's own heart. He's also an adulterer, a murderer, conspiracy to commit murder. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the guy. You got Noah, got drunk. You got Lot. We're going to talk about in a minute. And all of his business, and these people that have these jacked up stories that God declares righteous.
and keeps working through them when they just do doobery stuff. I mean, in the end, all this is about how do I walk with God, or how does He walk with me? Because at least in my experience, as I begin to learn things about the kingdom and really could see what His expectations were on me in my walk in my life, and I kept seeing that all I kept doing was it
Didn't work.
either I would make it fall apart, or some circumstance would make it seem like.
Yeah.
None of that fazed Him.
Right. Well, we're such a linear being, and if you're watching or not familiar with what that means, being a linear being is like, we think of things having a start and a stop, and they're on a trajectory, just like our life. We're born, we grow, we die, and
it's measurable.
And it's measurable, and we react. There's situations, and then we react to them, and then we make choices and react to the consequences. God works in a very different way, and one of the things that kingdom vision is not is, I've actually heard this kind of hubbub already, was, man, I really want to go to this thing so I can learn to see things how God sees them. And there was an expectation of, well, here's how God sees it, so if you put these lenses on, you'll be fine all the time. And because our cultures, hello Heather, our culture's so formulaic. It's like, oh, your marriage is in trouble? Here, read this book. Or your finances are in trouble. Well, you got to go listen to this guy's podcast or whatever, and that'll do it. Do his 10 steps to whatever, and it'll work every time, all the time. And that's what our culture's looking for. There's only one problem with that, and it's called the Scripture. It just doesn't work that way. And so what we're going to do is begin to unpack, and I almost hate that it's just men this time. Maybe we'll do a co-ed one of these days when we can, because it's not like only men can have kingdom vision. It just so happens we're having a men's event where we're doing this. But one of the verses or the text and Tim's gonna show you some examples of this that we're gonna kind of start off in. So if you're coming to the deal and you're watching today, just go read, double dip. It's gonna be fine, I promise. Don't feel like you shouldn't come anymore because you watched our podcast.
Yeah.
But we're going to talk about Hebrews. We're going to go back to probably chapter 5 or 6 and read through and look at some things. Hey, Margie. But specifically want to jump into Romans chapter 8. And what he's done in Romans, or in Romans, I've been in Romans forever. In Hebrews, like chapters 5, 6, 7, and on through there, maybe just 6 and 7. And then, he continues at 9. He's talking about the old covenant versus the new covenant, Levitical priesthood versus the priesthood that Jesus was under, which was the order of Melchizedek, and what that is. And there's lots of weird thoughts on that, and we're not going to get into. If you're expecting us to say, here's what the order of Melchizedek is, and here's who he was, that's not the purpose of this. But if you look in chapter 8, there's something really important, and this is one of those things like 2 Chronicles 16:9, where there is a context and there are actual things that are being taught at the surface, but there's some deeper truths that if you stop and slow down and think about, that are important. If you look in there, he says, after having done that this whole time, he says, done that. What he's done this whole time is talking about the different priesthoods and the covenants, blah, blah, blah. And then he says in verse 1 of chapter 8, now here's the main point of what's being said in this. He's like, I'm going to summarize it for you and tell you why this is important. We have this kind of high priest who sat down at the right hand of the throne of the majesty of the heavens, a minister of the sanctuary, and catch these words, and the true tabernacle that was set up by the Lord and not man. Now, this was written to the Hebrew people, and they would have understood that the tabernacle, the temple that they knew, the tabernacle, the one in the wilderness that moved, and the temple, which was a permanent, that's the word I'm looking for, permanent building, had very exacting standards. We're going to talk about that in a second. But they did it. You even have this whole story about David wanting to build it, and he wasn't allowed, and they got all this stuff from places, and they did it. They built it. It was set up by man. But this one, he says, Jesus is operating in the sanctuary and the tabernacle set up by the Lord, capital L, not by man. For every high priest is appointed to offer gifts and sacrifices. Every high priest. Now, you had priests, and then you had the high priest. The high priest was the one that got to go in once a year behind the veil into the Holy of Holies and sacrifice for everybody.
With a rope tied around his waist.
With a rope tied around him in case he died. We're going to touch on that. Therefore, it was necessary for this priest to also to have something to offer. Like, he couldn't just offer stuff for you and for me. He had to have his own offering.
Yeah.
Because he was just a dude, just a man, sinful man. Then he says, now, if he were on earth, he being Jesus, he wouldn't be a priest, since there are those offering the gifts prescribed by the law. He wasn't of the Aaronic priesthood. He was not of that tribe. He wasn't a priest by the old law. He couldn't have done it. And so, therefore, he's got to be, by Jewish law, as it were, a priest by the order of a different order. And he's saying it's a better one. But here's where we get to, verse 5. These, talking about all these things on earth that are set up by men, serve as a copy and a shadow of the heavenly things. And as Moses was warned when he was about to complete the tabernacle, for God said, be careful that you make everything according to the pattern that was shown to you on the mountain. But Jesus now obtained a superior ministry, and to that degree he is mediator of a better covenant, which has been established on better promises.
Mm.
So what we're going to be attempting to unpack, and we're going to show you an example of in a minute, watch my time, is when we started to define kingdom vision, I was telling Tim the other day, to me it's like, this is a terrible analogy. Forgive me. So all of you super ultra conservatives out there, if you're reading this, don't freak out. But it's like you got to have on the right beer goggles. All right, you got to have on the right lenses. Maybe
Joseph Smith.
maybe a better one is like those old decoder things you used to get in your cereal.
Yeah.
And it was like this red piece of plastic, and there was hidden messages on it. It's not like hidden messages, like secret messages, like Da Vinci Code stuff. That's not what I mean. But he's like, I'm going to give you a pattern of things that you're going to do here. And it's just a shadow. It's not really the reality of what's happening.
Well, let's talk about that reality for just a second.
Okay.
So we're having kingdom vision. So we break it down to it. We're trying to explain at least how we see how God sees things, backed up by evidence and history, those kinds of things. And why I do that? Because it helps you determine a little bit more, maybe your walk and the turmoil that you're going through at any given time, or someone else. And so what was it we were talking about?
Shadows?
No, I told you, let's talk about the reality.
Yeah.
So here might be the hard thing. You were talking about decoder rings and all that kind of stuff, and people, and people have done that.
Yeah.
They'll get into Revelations and they'll go, okay, so here's the way you got to figure it out, and we're just missing the number. That's human thinking.
Right.
And that's human thinking in terms of things being organized and things have a process and a movement mathematically, those kinds of things. And that's right. People say that God is a God of order, and he is, but not based on our order, not how we can culminate it, not how we can go, okay, well, if you have this, then you'll be able to understand these things. Some of that's true, but in the end, God's order is an order that we cannot comprehend because we weren't created at that level.
Well, and he's not beholden himself.
And it doesn't mean that he's evil and he's holding it back from you. A child cannot grasp the depth and the burdens that a parent has because they're not old enough and they hadn't been through those kinds of things. And that's even a bad example, because that would mean that, if we're around long enough, we're going to be able to attain the level that God is. Can't be done. But we have to believe that he is good, like the definition of good, not how we want to define good or how we even see good. He is the absolute culmination of what good is. And you have to believe that he is. That way you can follow through all this other stuff. And we're trying to piece the puzzle together.
Right.
Instead of looking at him and going,
who are you?
If I believe that you got control of this thing, no matter what's happening here by my hand or other hands or circumstance or whatever it is, Give me the grace to walk through it.
Right.
In the end, it's about looking at him all the time. So that's reality.
Right. Well, and
Not us trying to make a reality so that we can even look ahead and figure some of that out.
well, and some of the stuff that we're going to be digging through and talking about is being able to identify when we ourselves, the people around us, are focusing on the shadows instead of on the reality.
Yes.
And because that's what we do. We tend to focus on the tangible, the shadow, the things that we can touch, feel, see, taste,
That we can
smell.
define.
We can define, and ultimately the things we can control. And
Yes.
and what happens is when we focus on that, we miss the reality that's beyond the shadow. And the reality beyond the shadow is the goal. I freak people out sometimes when we talk about, hey, Victor, we freak people out sometimes when we talk about, there's this little phrase that I throw out, and I will be honest, sometimes I throw it out to watch people twist. But I refer to it as the idolatry of Scripture. And they're like, what do you mean? And I'm like, even when we go to train people to study their Bible, if studying your Bible is your end goal, then you've now put the study of the Scripture in a place that it's really not the reality. It's not the end goal. What's the end goal of studying your Scripture is to get into the face of God and learn more of Him.
Yeah.
And so we fall short of the reality because we're focused on the shadow. Think about whatever church you attend. Every program, every man-made construct that we have, let's just put it in the context of the temple. It is a shadow, pointing to the real. And you're like, oh, that's just the way we do church. It's our liturgy. Well, he's speaking of the Old Testament law. You think we've got liturgy? Try being an Orthodox Jew.
Yeah.
You know? And I don't mean the 600 whatever laws. I'm talking about just the regular
doing the church
Levitical
service.
ones. Yeah. You know, and there you do it this way, and the menorahs have to be just so, and the petals like this, and the almonds and this, and everything is particular. You don't think that's liturgical, but even in that degree of detail and attention, it's not that it's not important, but it's just a shadow.
Yeah.
And what we do as people is we think if we get the shadow screwed up, if we don't get the right worship set, if we don't get the right building set up, if we don't get the right fill in the blank, well, then everything's off the chart. Everything's off the wheels because we've missed the reality.
Well, and that even makes us, this is a little off subject, but it makes us get off, well, we don't want to pursue it anymore because there's no, or we don't see anything that's being produced well in ourselves or on our own walk if you just stay with being a Christian, which makes us try to do church and not do any of that.
Right.
And we get lost. All that happens because we're trying to define God and what He expects.
Well, I grew up in a world where there was no ecumenicalism, crossing of denominational lines was taboo.
Yeah.
You didn't do it. You might get
because
wrapped.
they were wrong.
Yeah, because they were wrong, or they were squirrely and whatever. And if you really pin people down, a lot of times they're like, "Oh yeah, they're probably saved," but you know, and we just don't associate with them. You know, come out from among them and be ye separate. That's what I always heard from preachers and stuff as I was growing up. But when you focus on the shadow and not the reality, and that the shadow becomes what you're shooting for, you can justify anything.
Yeah.
That's
and really what that is, it's a focus on yourself.
It is.
In the end, that's what's happening. And you're not focusing on the Creator. We still think that we can understand the Creator in all of His depth. If that were true, there would be no God.
Yeah.
And not even trying to get on that outlandish kind of thing. There is truth there. So look at these people. He's reading out of Hebrews, and it makes sense. And, he was talking to Hebrew Christians.
Right.
Nobody really knows who wrote Hebrews. A lot of people think Paul did it, but whoever did, they really understood the Jewish tradition. And they also really understood the depths of the kingdom.
Right, right.
And these poor people were they were just getting, not crucified, they were getting,
Persecuted.
And I mean bad.
Yeah.
They were getting persecuted as Jews. They were being persecuted as Christians. I mean, a secular world was just tearing them up. We don't know what persecution is. And this guy writing this book, I'm giving you context on this. He's explaining deep things to these people who have a very deep understanding of the written scriptures, as it were. And he's telling them, you need to stand up and be more than what you are. I mean, you look at the entirety of the book, it almost seems kind of sarcastic.
Yeah.
To people that are going, we're hanging on by our fingernails here, and whoever was bringing it to him wasn't somebody that wasn't enduring those things. That's the other part of it. They understood. And so what that means is these are people that have all the trappings and shadows and perfections, and they're willing to do it and they want to do it. But what he's telling them in the end is that you're looking at those things and you're missing the God that it's about.
Right.
And that's all he was trying to do. He wasn't punching them in the face, telling them you're not doing the things right. He's going, stop focusing there and look at the God, and your persecutions will not go away, but I mean in terms of eternity, you'll go.
They change their significance.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that we are wanting to do with this workshop or this seminar, whatever you want to call it, is to walk through the discovery process with people.
And that is discovered. That's the point. Even these people that he was hammering on or seemingly hammering on, that was a purpose. God was using that to grow them to be able to see him in a better context, if that makes sense.
Well, the educator in me always wants to start, you start from the end and work backwards. What is it that I want people to know when they walk out the door?
Yeah.
What I want people to know when they walk out the door is that whatever situation's in front of you, doesn't matter whatever scripture's in front of you, whatever life situation's in front of you, it's a shadow of something bigger in reality. And if we can look at things that way intentionally, and it takes intentionality.
It does take.
It doesn't just like, oh, I did the right reading program, and so now I see the kingdom well. Because what we're going to do is we're going to take some scriptural situations and show you some characters where they would do great, and then they would collapse, and then they would do great. And even through the collapses, God's still working and still moving and doing things with them and all kinds of stuff.
He's doing the same things he was doing. God didn't develop into where he is now.
Yeah,
we will show that same line of thinking, look at the Father, look at the Father, look at the Father. That was happening from Adam all the way through Paul in the New Testament and all the way through there. None of that changed.
Right.
And so that's what we mean by kingdom vision, trying to see it the way God sees things. And there are expectations in that. And we're talking about saved people here from that point of view.
Well, and the approach we're going to take is not make sure that you figure out what you see properly so you can understand it. It's keep your eyes focused in the right spot.
Yes, absolutely.
Because
and the digressions, everything that you've been saying.
Yeah.
Is it, oh, well, okay, so he's looking for this and he's looking for that, and he don't go down that road any more than you have to.
Well, it's like, what would happen if we did the preaching before the song service and it's, deal. I mean, what people would come unwound. And I know this because I did it once for about a month, and I'm just going to be honest with you, it wasn't that great of an experience. Because we weren't prepared for that emotionally, mentally. It was just like, oh, this is not church. This is something different, And then we actually tried it one time when we did a couple of songs, had the sermon, and then did like 2 or 3 songs at the end. I loved that, but it was just weird for people.
Yeah.
So we went back and not that's what we want to do is go, well, one is right and one is wrong.
Yes.
It's okay to have these instruments but not these, or instruments and none, or fill in the blank of your flavor of preference. And that's where we want to go, because we want to make sure we get it right. And he's saying in this, it's not that it's not important, but it's just a shadow.
Or even doing things that are common.
Exactly.
I mean, I did it a while ago when we started the show. We're going to do the intro.
Yeah. Well, we didn't do the intro. What does that mean? Everything's going to fall apart. No.
We're not bound by that. Kingdom is not bound by that, I guess, is the point. Maybe that's kind of what we're showing, is that...
Well, in church leadership, forever, or I will say that I've ever been involved in. We spend a lot of time going, all right, we've got these 5 problems in our congregation. How do we address them? Marriage, family, blah, fill in the blank, sin. What are we going to do? We offer this program or that program. Those are good. They have really good things.
Yeah.
But just because it doesn't address the problem still exists, or it gets worse, or something else crops up, it doesn't mean that that thing was a failure. But even if it succeeds, it doesn't mean that that thing was the be all end all either. But what we do is we like, oh, this worked for us, so we'll write a book. And everybody buys the book. And if you'll model your church just like this book, everything's going to be great.
We have figured out how God intended it to be.
That's what people think.
That's what they think.
And then it doesn't work ultimately because we're worshiping the shadow and not the reality.
Yeah.
And we're going to want to drive people continually into the reality. Great example. We're going to walk through this more. I'll give you Tim's fixing to walk through something here too, is Joseph in Genesis, whatever that is, 43, 5, whatever it is. When Joseph gets, long story short, Joseph gets put in the pit. They got the coat of many colors, got blood on it. They put him in there. He gets sold into slavery. They go back and tell Dad he's dead. He goes off to Egypt. The story becomes great, blah, blah, blah. Well, the brothers come over during the famine. There's a part in that story that when they realize who he is, they flip smooth out. They're scared to death. They think they're about to die. And by the reality of this world, they were absolutely correct.
Yeah, Joseph would have been justified.
And had full authority. All right, just cut their heads off, be done with it. But there's something Joseph says in that reflects this whole thing. Because they're like, we're so sorry, we didn't, And they were I think they weren't just like, oh, dang, I got caught. I think
they were repentant
They
too.
were repentant. They felt bad about what they did. They'd grown, just like him. They'd matured. And he's like, no, you didn't do this. God did this to me. God brought me here. He basically said, God sent me ahead of you to prepare the way. And at that moment, Joseph's like, I don't even care about the mechanism of me getting here. I needed to get here, which is what Tim was talking about when you said our persecution takes on different significance. Because I can see him going, these are the guys that they did this to me, they did that to me, they did this to me. I was there that long, I was in prison, thought I was going to die there. He could go down the list, and every one of them would be right. But instead, he took on kingdom vision that said there was a bigger thing at work here.
Yeah.
That stuff was insignificant to what God was trying to do in the bigger plan. There's more to it than the individual circumstance.
Yeah. And
tuning our hearts to see our own circumstances and those around us in that fashion is what this is all about.
Yeah.
And get out of the surface, which is where Tim is
seeing eternal stuff like that's learned, and it comes piece by piece. And we don't really have a lot of time for me to get through this. So we're talking like at 30,000 feet up here.
Yeah.
What we're going to do when we actually teach this stuff, and probably here on the podcast some over the next few weeks, we're going to go to specific individuals in scriptural history and kind of show what's going on in a person at a given growth level relative to somebody else, and how they made decisions based off their walk and how they see the kingdom at the time. So I'll give you a quick one right now. And maybe you don't know any of these stories. We were talking about this the other day, that in a lot of church and stuff, when we were going through back 1,000 years ago, you'd go in and they'd tell you about Noah and the flood, and they'd tell you about Joseph and his coat of many colors. And, you get all these stories, right? And nowadays, a lot of people don't have those. They don't know what they are.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you do or not, but go back and read them. So it gives you a little bit of reference. But here we're talking about Abram. A lot of people know who Abraham was, and this was back before God made all of his promises about him getting these things. Well, anyway, he had a nephew, and his name was Lot. And this is in chapters 12 and 13 of Genesis. And so let me give you a little example here. So Abraham made a big blunder, and he actually got a lot of property out of it. And he and property then is camels and riches and servants and all that kind of stuff. And his nephew got a lot of them too. and they're in the land there, and there's not enough pasture to feed the cows, basically. And so, and their hired hands are fussing because they're having troubles doing their jobs, right? There wasn't any issue between Lot and Abraham, or not that I can read.
It was a logistics issue.
It was a logistics issue. And so Abraham brings it up. He says, look, we obviously need to spread out here a little bit. So I'll tell you what, you go where you want to. So where they were in the desert was the Jordan Valley over here, and that's where Sodom and Gomorrah and all these places, but it was a fertile place because they had water, right? Grass and all that kind of stuff. I don't know what it was like where they were at. I mean, it's kind of desertous these days. But anyway, Abraham, because of his place with God and things he had gone through with God, and he was in a really good place spiritually in his life at the time, when he made that comment to Lot, he really meant that. Go where you need to, because he's looking at he's got eternal vision. He's going, the Lord has walked with me. He's done these things. And it's not common sense based. And so that's when he tells Lot that he really means that. Hey, I don't have a preference here. And it's not because he's wishy-washy or anything.
It's because he understood it didn't matter.
Well, he understood who the provider was.
Right.
And so whether he had to go to the barren desert or he went to the green valley, he figured the Lord's going to take care of this.
Well, in the example we've been talking about that very thing is as a pastor, I used to all the time, especially from young couples who just got married. Should I take this job? Should we move to this city? What should I do? I want to find God's will for my life. Let me be careful.
Yeah.
God may have a particular will for your life, just like he did the Apostle Paul. There was a plan marked out, okay? And I believe that God marks the end from the beginning, according to the scriptures and all those things. But we think of that in a very linear sense. Well, if I don't get it just right, then we're going to screw it up.
But if it's his will, he's going to prepare you even when you don't even know you're getting prepared for it.
Exactly. And so my admonition to people a lot of times is, they're like, well, which job should I take? It doesn't matter. And they're like, well, I want to make sure, I'm doing God's will. And it's like, well, can you feed your family spiritually and financially there? They're both about the same. And which one do you want to do more?
Yeah.
Well, they're equal. Well, take the one that pays better then, and they're like, well, what if I choose the wrong one? We go back to Abraham and Lot. He really believed, it doesn't matter, Lot, if you go left or you go right, I'll take what's left, because the provision is not in the shadow of what we see. The provision's in the reality of the God of the shadow. Does that make sense?
Well, it does make sense. And you also have to understand there was a difference between Abraham and Lot.
Yeah.
Lot was around through a lot of Abraham's growth, kingdom-wise, what God is teaching him, building him up to be, and he even made a lot of mistakes. But in this particular instance, Lot had been around, so he'd probably seen and heard about a lot of that stuff too. But what was happening to Abraham was not for Lot.
Right.
I mean, from God's perspective and where he wants Lot to be and all that. And there's you could get into a lot of conversation about this. And it says that Lot looked down and he saw this green valley and a great place to pasture, but there was something that was also in there that they also knew. They knew what was going on in Sodom and Gomorrah. They weren't unknowing about that. And so Lot's looking at the situation, not from, well, I'm good with whatever the Lord wants us to do here, and I'm not even telling you what they should have done.
Right.
I'm just saying that that's where Abraham was for sure. God's the provider. I don't have to take care of all my stuff. He's going to help me deal with all that. So he was in a good place spiritually at the time. A few verses before that, that wasn't the story. But here he is. Lot's not in that place. And he looks down there and he might have thought, hey, this is a great place. He's probably like we are, he's going, man, I can go down here and my stuff is really going to explode. Right. And I'm going to do well, and because he's looking at himself in that regard.
Right.
And that he is the master of what he has and what he does. And maybe not even in a bad sense. He just human thinking, right? And he gets down there and it turns into a mess, and it messed up Lot's family for a long time. And here's the kicker from eternal thinking. Everything we would read in Lot's story would see he was a bad parent. He led his family wrong. He was just feeling
He's
himself.
immoral.
He was immoral. He was all these things. We don't really see that he was immoral, but he sure lived in places that it was like we do now.
Yeah.
And Hebrews tells us that he had a righteous soul.
Yeah.
There is
Yeah.
no way we would come to that conclusion. But God said that he had a righteous soul through all that.
Yeah.
Wow.
When we see a flavor of the same thing with Job. Job is declared to be a righteous man, and yet if you read the meat of the middle of it is him just laying in ashes and lamentation, all this crap happening to him, and he's but he's declared to be righteous. And to me, Abram and Lot are very good delineated examples of kingdom vision and earthly vision, shadow vision and reality. Abraham was looking through kingdom eyes at the reality, which is God will provide whatever. And Lot, and even in Genesis 13, it says he looked towards, and I like the King James, the well-watered plains of Sodom. He was literally looking at the surface about what can this do, what can I do with it. He was looking at the shadow.
Well, let's put it in real kingdom terms here. Abraham was looking at that, and he's looking at God. And he's going, God's going to, not for the answer, but he knew that God works all things out right away.
Yeah.
Lot would be a lot less mature. He might have looked down there and go, man, look at, I'll be able to do all kinds of things ministerially with this. I'm not telling you that's what he was thinking, but I'm showing you the maturity difference of how we might have done it. So he went down there to go attack hell and all of its fury, and he's going to change everything. Could it have handed? Sure, it could have. That's not how the kingdom was going to work it out. Did Lot do the wrong thing? I'm not going to that part, but I am telling you this. In Hebrews, it tells us that he had a righteous soul. And I have to look at that and go, that's not how I'm looking at it, but if that's how God looks at it, maybe I need to stare at God a little longer, and that'll help me deal with the things I deal with.
And that's part of the whole purpose of this function is to get ourselves to look at things like, here's what we think it would look like, but the scriptures will often declare that God sees things in a different way, and we can't just dismiss that. We have to deal with it.
My ways are not your ways, and my thoughts are not your thoughts. And we know that scripture.
But
we're going to start looking at it from a perspective where I
could see me sitting in Lot's place looking at the desert side, as it were, and we don't know exactly, we're using that for example, and going, that's going to be really hard down there. I don't want to do that. And it's not even that he was deceived by riches. That could be. But it might be simply of like, I know I need to go, or it would be, that's just going to be hard and I don't want to do it. I don't know that you say, did Lot do the right or the wrong thing? I don't think there necessarily was a right or the wrong thing, evidenced by the scriptures where Abram said, it doesn't matter.
Yes.
Do what you want. I'll take what's left, because his vision. The disciples at blind Bartimaeus is another great example.
Yeah.
Earthly thinking says, why did he have this? Is it his parents, or is it him that sinned? And you can almost hear it in Jesus' voice looking at him like, neither?
Yeah, the kingdom would look at that with that perplexity and go, it wasn't. It was that way because I'm doing this.
Yeah, he was this way because of this moment, it actually declares. Yeah. And it's almost like Jesus is trying to convey to them, is like, you're looking at it all wrong. You're looking at the shadow. You're not looking at the reality. And so we're going to be spending, we got to close up today, but that's what we're going to be doing. The next couple of weeks on the podcast, we're going to be digging into some of the things topic-wise that we'll be using to do this. But we also want to, as we go, to share with people how we come to these conclusions, how the scriptures help us come to these conclusions right out of them. You know, what is some of our methodology behind when we come across things that seem weird, or maybe have a deeper meaning, or a larger kingdom impact, or whatever? What's the process look like?
Yeah.
To thinking that way, and to ingesting the world that way, ingesting the word that way, ingesting your church that way. It's everything, and it will change the way you look at everything.
Yeah.
We were talking about blind Bartimaeus, and I was like, I always use the example with Brenna, with our special needs, daughter. The reality of some of the scriptural things, blind Bartimaeus and the paralytic at the pool. Here's the truth and the reality. They endured what they endured so that God could heal him in that moment and prove who he was. You can't get around it. The sovereignty of God allowed it. They suffered in their life, in their vision that was this big. Their life stinks. But it was that way so that a broader message could be done, could be had, a broader meaning, a deeper reality could be shown. And in our deal, I have to face the fact sometimes that there are deeper realities, there are levels of maturity that needed in our existence to get to. And it's real hard. I have to be real careful. I'm not saying God did these things, so, but it's like not punishment or whatever. But the reality is we know things about the kingdom now that we did not know before she was born.
Yes.
We didn't understand. Did he make her that way to teach us those things? I don't know. But I know this, he did use it to teach us those things. And so it's easy to go, I can't believe this happened to her. Why did he allow this to happen? Why did he let Bartimaeus be blind? Why did he let the paralytic be healed? It's easy to look at it that way and focus on that. What we want to help people to do is no, back up. The specifics of it are what they are. They're important, but always be looking for that bigger reality.
Well, and the bigger reality, and something like with Brenna, is that he doesn't see her as deformed and messed up.
Exactly.
In the reality of things, is she saved, she not saved, not getting into that part. I'm telling you that at the condition she's in, that little girl rejoices when there's things going.
She does.
And it's something to watch. But my point is that while we're all worried about how she is, and poor Matt and Tammy have to live their life with, blah, da, 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 they have learned so many things about God and the kingdom through that. And when he had done something like that on purpose, well, in this life, he obviously did.
Yeah.
Because he's not even measuring in eternity measurement. Brenna's going to be walking and jumping and carrying on just like everybody as she was created to be.
Right. Well,
that's the part we have a hard time grasping off, and you have to believe the fact.
You have to believe it, and you have to confront things like, what is it, Psalm 139, where it says, you were formed in the belly. I mean, it wasn't that it was a happenstance. That God did not roll the dice on creation and hope that it came out okay. Snake eyes, that's not the way it worked. She was formed.
Yes.
Formed in the belly. The world looks at it like, where did it go wrong? Yeah. We have chosen to believe the scriptures and say it didn't go wrong at all.
Yes.
It didn't go wrong at all.
That's a great way to look at it.
It is the path that we're on by divine sovereignty. One of the things that this kingdom vision deal is going to confront people with is, do you actually believe in the sovereignty of God?
And are you willing to let go of yourself?
Exactly.
To see it? Because that's where we have true power.
Right.
Is deciding to do it my way, even when I know his way, but I still want to have control.
Exactly. Well, there's going to be more to come. We got a bunch of stuff we're going to talk about. And here's the deal about this deal. This is not just a one-day event. It is this time. But there's going to be two more. There's going to be one late summer and then one on into the fall that'll kind of be the capstone of this discussion that we're going to keep rolling in through 3 different events. And so if you missed this one, still come to the other ones. But we want to encourage you to come May 14th, Bridge Fellowship here in Martins Mill. It's at 9 o'clock. We'll feed you lunch. We'll get you home at a decent hour. So mow your yards Friday night. You got plenty of daylight, to go mow your yard, get your rat killing done, get a babysitter, whatever you got to do. Come see us on May the 14th, and we'll just try to share our hearts with you. Tim, you got anything?
And it's not just us. We're looking for yours, too.
Exactly. And
we're not coming to tell you this is how the kingdom thinks.
I'm glad you said that. Let me touch on it. This is not going to be a come, sit, get kind of a deal. Bring a Bible, bring a pen, and a willingness to share.
There'll be some challenges going on. We want you to bring those up.
Yep.
Let's work through them, see what we come up with.
That's right. And there'll be some testimony time and things like that, worship time. Yeah. And so it's going to be a very interactive day. It's not come, sit, get, and get fed like baby birds. It's come and let's wrestle with some of these things together.
That's a good description.
Appreciate y'all joining us today. We had quite a bit of thank you, Miss Edna, for the kind words that I can't read in Spanish. But
use your English, Edna.
Oh, I love you so much, Edna. I can't wait to see you again. Thank y'all for joining us today. We'll be back next week, Lord willing, on Friday Live. Y'all have a great week. Talk to you later.